This year, Pesach comes on a Motzei Shabbat. Just after the Sabbath ends, we take from flame that's already been kindled at the time that we lit our Shabbat lights, and we kindle the Yontiv candles, and we're going to use those flames to make Havdalah in amidst the Kadesh section of the Seder. So we'll sanctify the holiday of Pesach, going from the holiness of Shabbat to the holiness of the Yom Tov. There are always special insertions in the Kadesh section of the printed Haggadah that you can look at for instructions and to rely upon to making this unique break from the Sabbath itself to Passover. But what is the connection between the two? Or more pointedly, what's the connection between this week's Torah portion, Tzav, in the book of Leviticus, and the sacrifice of Pesach that is so central and essential to the Seder, not only according to Rabbi Gamliel, but to many in Jewish communities around the world who make this a night of eating roasted meat. Thinking about the place of sacrifice in the story of the Jewish people and in the Passover story, we think about the earliest mentions of sacrifice in the Torah, all the way back to Genesis, Bereshit, the story of Cain and Abel. We think about how the ancestors sacrificed and ate of mincha offerings, which Parshat Tzav explains is the source for eating matzah. Leftovers from the mincha dough would be made into unleavened cakes and eaten to share in that offering to God, to ingest a little of the holy potential that is symbolized by flour and water mixed together as dough. Indeed, it could rise to become a loaf, symbolizing opportunity, holy opportunity. And a reminder from the matzah stage to the leavened stage that we should be careful about how we grow our opportunities and which we take and hold versus those that we should keep in matzah stage, that we don't let grow too big, that we don't let rise in our eyes, because some opportunities indeed are the products of our Yetzer Hara, according to tradition. Our inclinations for a little devilishness, our inclinations to do that which we know is not so great and wonderful for us. From the wrong foods we choose to eat, to, of course, the wrong crowds we hang with, the ideas we hold up in an idolatrous way and don't look at as opportunities for more learning and growth. But to the details of sacrifices and the questions about why sacrifice would play such a central role in the story of humanity as the Torah portrays it, in the story of the Jewish people vis-a-vis our ancestors, and in the story of Passover as the Paschal sacrifice remains a central symbol of our evening. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks wrote a piece about Parshat Tzav and sacrifices, an insightful entry in his book about Jewish ethics, entitled Violence and the Sacred. Why sacrifices, he asked. Brings us back to the story of Cain and Abel, where Cain sacrificed from the choice fruits of the earth, and Abel from the choice of his flock, an animal. At first, the thinking was, as Rabbi Joseph Albo explained in his ethical treatise, Sefer HaIkarim, the core principles of Jewish faith tradition and philosophy. The idea was, the Torah presents Cain's idea that we should eat of the earth, the vegetables, the fruits, the seed-bearing plants, all God had given us in the Garden of Eden. Abel brings from the flock, and God accepts that offer. And so Albo's theory is, in fact, that killing animals for food is inherently wrong. What arises from this story is that Abel, believed that he should be able to overcome, subdue, put to use all of the animals of the world for food or for whatever kind of productivity he needed them as fuel or supply. But Cain, he believed that there was a strong kinship between man and the animals. And that is why he didn't offer an animal sacrifice, but a vegetable one of his own. Once Cain saw that Abel's sacrifice had been accepted while his was not, he reasoned thus, quoting Rabbi Sachs, "If God, who forbids us to kill animals for food, permits and even favors killing an animal as a sacrifice, and if, as Cain believed, there is no ultimate difference between human beings and animals, then I shall offer the highest living being as a sacrifice to God, namely my brother Abel." Cain killed Abel as a human sacrifice. Why did God permit human beings to eat meat after the flood, after Noah comes off the ark? Because the world had been filled with violence. And the height of violence was for Cain to have thought that sacrificing another human life was a religious act, an act in the name of God. And so God permits the eating of animals and yet asks us to be sure that we consider their lives and so to slaughter them in a unique way. And thusly, no limb from a living animal can be eaten by the children of Noah in what we call the Noahide laws or covenant. And the Jewish people are given a set of very specific rules about what is kosher to eat and what is not, and how to slaughter and how to prepare the animals that they will consume. Now, given all that, what's the connection to the Passover story? Here they were, slaves in Egypt, persecuted and oppressed. And it would have been very easy for the Jewish people to, like Cain, turn on their brothers and sisters. They might have been themselves ready to sacrifice those human beings in violent ways even. And yet, God makes quite a statement about how we are to allow God to be the master of history in that moment. And we're to shut ourselves in our homes. And we are to take animals, yes, that were sacred to Egypt, and to slaughter them for a unique paschal offering, and to share those with our neighbors. God allowed for the eating of that flesh in order to remind us, yes, of our relationships with animals and with higher beings. There would be no human sacrifice, and in this case, even for the sake of rebellion and for the sake of revolution, for freeing themselves from slavery. That type of violence was called for only by God in this case. Now, use of force issues aside and defense issues that we must take seriously, the ideas of whether or not wars are ethical or just, and which wars the Israelites would engage in and which self-defense we would be right to stand up for, even in our time with the Israeli Defense Forces and the like. The idea in the Passover story is that God said, "You shall not commit that violence against your brother. I will. For life and death is in my hands. And by sacrificing this Paschal lamb, you shall understand more about the power of life and death and about the power of servitude and freedom. You will go on a journey to sanctify life, and you will go on a journey through history, generation to generation, sure to eat of the Paschal lamb and sure to symbolize it on your Seder plate, to remind yourselves of what redemption looks like and how we must fight against slavery, oppression, tyranny, and othering human beings. This is the message within the sacrifices in Parshat Tzav, the sacrifices that call upon us to find our humanity, our feelings of thankfulness and gratitude, to come and make atonement when we are either guilty or sinful. And these are the messages of the sacrifice in the Passover story. To ask God to stand up for those who are in need and most needy, to open our doors and share with them meals of holiness, prepared in just the right kosher way. As a Jewish people, to know that there are times to let God do the ultimate work of measuring out life and death, and for us to pursue life, to sanctify our homes, and to appreciate the blood, the lifeblood of all humanity. In fact, Rashi explains that the blood of the Paschal sacrifice was not on the outside lintel of the doorposts for God or God's angel for that night of the slaying of the firstborn, the 10th plague. In fact, the blood of the Paschal sacrifice was on the inside doorpost of the home, to remind us that we do have the powers, in a certain sense, of life and death in our hands, but with nourishing ourselves through holy sacrifice, by making holy sacrifices in the largest and broader sense, we prepare holy tables. We create a world of more freedom, and we try to rid the world of the evil that slavery and idolatry represent. These are the connections between the Sabbath and Pesach. And as we go from holiness to holiness, let me wish you Shabbat Shalom and Chag Kasher V'Sameach.